My name is Christy Warren, 26 years old. I still remember the way my dad's face turned crimson as he pointed at the door and screamed those words that changed everything: "Get out and stay out." All because I finally found the courage to tell them I was dropping out of law school to follow my dreams. What they didn't know was that while studying cases I hated, I had secretly built a tech empire worth $30 million. Would they have treated me differently if they'd known? Trước khi tôi chia sẻ những gì đã xảy ra, sau đó hãy cho tôi biết bạn đang xem từ đầu và nhấn subscribe nếu bạn tin rằng đam mê quan trọng hơn kỳ vọng của người khác. Growing up in the Warren family meant one thing was certain: you would become a lawyer. My father, Richard Warren, was a renowned corporate attorney who had built his reputation defending Fortune 500 companies. His leather-bound law books lined every wall of his home office, and framed newspaper clippings chronicling his biggest wins were displayed prominently throughout our Boston home. My mother, Donna Warren, was equally impressive as a federal judge known for her unwavering commitment to justice and precise interpretation of the law. She wore her black robe like armor and commanded respect in every room she entered. My older brother Jason had followed seamlessly in their footsteps, becoming a rising star in the district attorney's office by the age of 30. Then there was me, Christy Warren, the youngest child and only daughter expected to continue the Warren legal dynasty that spanned 3 generations. My grandfather had been a judge, his father a prominent civil rights attorney, and somehow I was supposed to feel honored to bear the weight of this legacy on my shoulders. "One day you'll argue before the Supreme Court," my father would say during dinner, not as a question of if, but when. They had my entire life mapped out from kindergarten, with every achievement serving as just another stepping stone toward the inevitable legal career that awaited me. I still remember being 8 years old and receiving a children's book about famous female judges instead of the chemistry set I had begged for. By 12, my parents had enrolled me in debate club even though I wanted to join the computer science team. My bedroom walls weren't decorated with posters of bands or movie stars, but with framed quotes from Ruth Bader Ginsburg and Thurgood Marshall. The problem wasn't that I hated law. I could appreciate its importance and even found certain aspects fascinating. The problem was that from the moment I first placed my hands on a keyboard at age 10, I knew my passion lay elsewhere. While other kids were playing video games, I was learning to code and dreaming of creating software that would change the world. In high school, I maintained perfect grades to please my parents, while secretly teaching myself programming languages late into the night. I built my first app at 16, a simple program to help students organize their study schedules. When it gained popularity among my classmates, I had to pretend it was just a hobby, nothing serious. My father dismissed it as playing with computers. "It's good to have hobbies, Christy," he'd say, patting my shoulder, "but don't let them distract you from what really matters." College was when I began living my double life in earnest. I attended a prestigious university where I dutifully majored in political science as the expected prelude to law school. But I also signed up for every computer science elective I could fit into my schedule and joined the entrepreneurship club where I met others who shared my passion for innovation. It was during sophomore year that I started developing my first serious project in my dorm room, an application focused on personal data security that could detect and prevent unauthorized access to users' information. I worked on it between classes after finishing my political theory papers and deep into the night while my roommate slept. That was also when I met Samantha Reeves, a guest speaker at our entrepreneurship club, and a successful tech founder who had built and sold 2 companies before turning 40. She had short silver hair, wore sleek black blazers, and spoke with the kind of confident authority I wished I could embody. After her talk, I mustered the courage to approach her with questions about my application. "You've got something special here," she told me after reviewing my work, her eyes bright with interest. "Most people focus on features, but you're thinking about what users truly need, which is control over their digital lives." Samantha became my mentor, meeting with me monthly to review my progress and connecting me with developers who could help refine my code. She never asked why a political science major was building security software, and I appreciated that she saw me for who I was, not who my family expected me to be. By senior year, What had started as a project had evolved into a fully functional product with a growing user base. When Samantha introduced me to investors who saw its potential, I found myself in an unexpected position fielding an acquisition offer of $500,000 for my hobby. I signed the papers in a coffee shop off campus, hands trembling as I realized I had just become a half-millionaire at 22. I transferred most of the money into a separate account my parents knew nothing about, telling myself it was just seed funding for my next idea. I celebrated alone that night, ordering expensive sushi delivery to my dorm room and opening a bottle of champagne I shared with no one. When I graduated summa cum laude a few months later, my parents beamed with pride as I accepted my diploma. They threw an elaborate party with their colleagues and friends, where everyone congratulated me on my acceptance to my father's alma mater law school. Among the guests, I smiled and nodded, playing the role of the dutiful daughter, continuing the family tradition, while secretly clutching the key to a future only I could see. "We're so proud of you," my mother said that night, her arm around my shoulder as she introduced me to her fellow judges. "Christy is following in our footsteps, but I suspect she'll go even further than we did." I nodded and smiled, wondering what they would say if they knew I had already taken my first steps down a completely different path, one that led away from courtrooms and legal briefs toward server rooms and venture capital meetings. As I packed for law school that fall, I tucked my ambitions and $500,000 into a corner of my heart, promising myself I would find a way to honor both my family's expectations and my own dreams. I believed I could do both, at least for a while. I was wrong. The first signs of trouble appeared during my second semester of law school. While my classmates immersed themselves in case studies and legal precedents, spending hours in study groups debating the finer points of constitutional law, I found myself staring blankly at textbooks, my mind wandering to algorithms and user interfaces. I had maintained a perfect GPA my first semester through sheer determination and late nights, but as winter turned to spring, the facade began to crack. Professor Harrington's contract law class, which should have been straightforward, became my nemesis. During his lectures, I would catch myself sketching wireframes for a new app idea in the margins of my notebook. "Ms. Warren, perhaps you'd like to share your thoughts on the Williams v. Walker Thomas furniture case?" Professor Harrington asked one day, catching me distracted. I fumbled through an answer, feeling the weight of disappointed glances from classmates who expected more from Richard Warren's daughter. The professor's arched eyebrow said everything I wasn't living up to the Warren name. That night, instead of reviewing my notes, I found myself working on a new project that had been consuming my thoughts, a platform that used artificial intelligence to identify and protect sensitive information across devices. The work flowed naturally, energizing me in a way that legal studies never did. Dawn broke before I realized I'd spent the entire night coding. The only person who knew about my double life was Madison Taylor, my closest friend from undergrad who had followed me to law school, but unlike me, genuinely loved legal studies. With her long auburn hair, always perfectly styled, and her pristine note-taking system, Madison embodied the ideal law student I pretended to be. "You look terrible," she said, sliding a coffee across the library table to me that morning. "Another all-nighter with your secret boyfriend?" I laughed, rubbing my eyes. "Something like that. Except this boyfriend is written in Python and might actually be worth something someday." Madison's expression softened with concern. "Christy, I get that you're passionate about this tech stuff, but you're going to burn out trying to do both. Your family name might open doors here, but professors still expect you to do the work." I know. I sighed, gulping the coffee. But every time I try to focus on case law, my mind drifts back to my project. It feels like I'm fighting against gravity. Madison leaned forward. "Then maybe you need to consider the unthinkable. Maybe law isn't for you." I almost spilled my coffee. "And tell my parents what exactly, sorry about 3 generations of legal excellence, but I'd rather play with computers." My dad would disown me. "Would that be worse than being miserable for the next 40 years? She challenged. Her words haunted me, but I pushed them aside. I could manage both worlds. I had to. As midterms approached, I developed a system allocating strict hours to law studies and my project. But no matter how detailed my schedule, the tech work always spilled over, stealing hours from sleep and study time. My grades began to slip, not dramatically, but enough to receive concerned emails from professors who expected excellence from a Warren. Meanwhile, my startup was gaining momentum. Using the money from my first acquisition, I had hired 2 part-time developers to help refine the platform. We worked remotely, meeting via video calls that I took from empty classrooms, or my car to maintain secrecy. The contrast between my 2 lives grew starker. In my law classes, I felt like an imposter mechanically going through motions in a play I'd been cast in without auditioning. But during those video calls with my small team discussing feature improvements and security protocols, I came alive, speaking with a confidence and authority that surprised even me. 6 months into law school, disaster struck in the form of my first C on a crucial civil procedure exam. By Warren standards, this wasn't just disappointing, it was catastrophic. My phone rang that evening while I was reviewing analytics for our beta release. "Christy, your Professor Phillips emailed me about your exam grade," my father said, his voice tight with controlled disappointment. "What's going on? Are you ill?" The question wasn't out of concern for my health, but searching for any acceptable explanation for failure. I closed my laptop, heart pounding. "I've just been stressed, Dad. The material is challenging and—" "Warrens don't make excuses," he cut me off. "If the material is challenging, you work harder. Your brother managed to graduate top of his class while volunteering at the legal aid clinic." Of course Jason had. Perfect, dedicated Jason who had probably dreamed in legal statutes since childhood. "I'll do better next time," I promised, the words hollow in my mouth. "See that you do. Your mother and I didn't raise you to be mediocre, Christy." The call ended, and I sat in silence, the word mediocre echoing in my head. In law school, perhaps I was. But in my other life, the one they knew nothing about, I was anything but. That night, an email arrived that would change everything. A major cybersecurity firm was interested in acquiring my platform with an initial offer of $5 million. They had tested our beta, been impressed with the AI capabilities, and wanted to integrate it into their enterprise solutions. I stared at the screen for an hour, reading and rereading the email. $5 million. For something my father dismissed as playing with computers. For my true passion. The universe was sending me a message I couldn't ignore any longer. The following weekend, I returned home for our monthly family dinner, a tradition my mother insisted upon to maintain family bonds. As we sat around the gleaming mahogany table that had witnessed countless discussions of landmark cases and legal strategy, I studied my family's faces, wondering how they would react if I told them the truth. My father carved the roast with surgical precision, discussing Jason's recent courtroom victory. My mother nodded appreciatively, adding commentary about the judge's reputation. They were in their element, a perfect legal power couple grooming their son to continue their legacy. "And how are classes, Christy?" my mother eventually asked, turning her attention to me. "Your father mentioned you had a small setback in civil procedure." A small setback. The Warren way of acknowledging failure without admitting its existence. "I'm managing," I said carefully. "Actually, I've been thinking about—" "She needs to focus," my father interrupted. "Too many distractions these days with social media and whatever else you young people do on your phones." He looked at me directly. "Law isn't forgiving of divided attention, Christy. You're either committed or you're not." The irony wasn't lost on me. He had no idea how divided my attention truly was, or that my phone contained emails about million-dollar acquisitions rather than social media distractions. "You're destroying your future," he continued, his voice dropping to that low, intense tone reserved for his deepest disappointments. "I spoke with Judge Calloway last week. He was considering you for a clerkship after graduation, but now he's hesitant. Do you understand what you're throwing away?" I nodded, pushing food around my plate, the weight of his words settling on my shoulders. But for the first time, I wondered if the future I was supposedly destroying was one I had ever wanted in the first place. 2 months after that painful family dinner, I received another email that would force my hand. The CEO of Quantum Shield, one of the largest cybersecurity companies in the country, wanted to personally discuss acquiring my third project, an advanced identity protection system I had been developing with my small team. The initial offer, $25 million. I read the email into the back row of my constitutional law class, the professor's voice fading to white noise as the number blazed in my mind. $25 million. More money than most people would see in a lifetime. More than enough to build the life I wanted on my own terms. That night, I lay awake in my apartment staring at the ceiling and confronting the decision I could no longer postpone. On one path lay the future my family had ordained: law school clerkships, eventually joining a prestigious firm, or following my mother to the bench. Security, respect, tradition. On the other path was uncertainty, but also freedom, passion, and now financial independence beyond what even my successful parents had achieved. I called Samantha at midnight, not caring about the hour. She answered on the third ring, her voice alert despite the time. "They've offered $25 million, I said without preamble. A low whistle came through the phone. "That's life-changing money, Christy." "I know." I clutched the phone tighter. "But it means dropping out, disappointing everyone." "Let me ask you something," Samantha said after a pause. "When you're 80 years old, looking back on your life, which will you regret more? Disappointing your parents now, or spending decades in a career that was never meant for you?" Her question lingered in the air between us. I knew the answer, but was afraid to voice it. "Your parents love you," she continued. "They may not understand at first, but that's because they want what they think is best for you. Sometimes the greatest act of love is letting someone choose their own path, even if it's not the one you would choose for them." After we hung up, I called Madison, who came over with a bottle of wine and listened as I wrestled with my future. "You've already made the decision," she said, refilling my glass. "You're just scared to say it out loud." "My family has never failed at anything," I whispered. "Dropping out would be the ultimate failure in their eyes." Madison shook her head. "Failure isn't dropping out of something that makes you miserable. Failure is never having the courage to pursue what lights you up." She raised her glass. "To the future tech mogul who's been hiding in law school textbooks." We talked until dawn, strategizing how I would break the news to my family. I drafted and redrafted a speech, trying to find the right words to make them understand this wasn't a rejection of them, but an embrace of myself. The next morning, bleary-eyed but resolved, I called the real estate agent who had been sending me listings and made an offer on a modern glass and steel mansion overlooking the ocean in Malibu. It was outrageously expensive, completely impractical for a single person, and exactly the fresh start I needed, thousands of miles from Boston and the weight of expectations there. "Are you sure about this property?" the agent asked, surprised at my immediate decision. "Most clients want to visit several times before making an offer on something in this price range." "I'm sure," I said, a strange calm settling over me. "It's time for a change." I paid the deposit from my first company sale funds, knowing the Quantum Shield deal would close soon. The house represented my commitment to my decision, a bridge I was burning behind me. There would be no going back after this. As I prepared to fly home and face my family, I thought about all the signs they had missed over the years. The coding books hidden beneath law journals on my shelves. The late-night calls I took in whispers. The light that came into my eyes when discussing technology, absent when talking about law. Had they been so focused on the path they'd chosen for me that they couldn't see I was already forging a different one? The night before my flight, I barely slept, rehearsing my speech and imagining every possible reaction. Would they yell, cry, try to talk me out of it? I packed a larger suitcase than necessary, intuition telling me I might not be returning to my apartment near campus. As the plane descended into Boston, anxiety twisted my stomach into knots. I was about to detonate a bomb in the middle of my family's carefully constructed world. But beneath the fear was something else, something that felt surprisingly like freedom waiting just on the other side of what would surely be the most difficult conversation of my life. The taxi dropped me off in front of my parents' Beacon Hill townhouse, its brick facade and black shutters radiating permanence and tradition. I stood on the sidewalk for a long moment, suitcase beside me, gathering courage. Through the bay window, I could see my mother arranging flowers in the living room, unaware that her world was about to shift. I had texted them that I was coming home for the weekend, making no mention of my true purpose. They had assumed it was just another family visit, perhaps, to discuss my improving grades, as I had been careful to perform better in recent weeks, while finalizing my exit strategy. The brass knocker felt heavy in my hand. 3 sharp raps, and the door opened to reveal my mother's surprised smile. "Christy, we weren't expecting you until dinner time." She embraced me, the familiar scent of her Chanel perfume enveloping me. "Your father's just finishing some work in his study. Come in, come in." I followed her into the house, noting how nothing ever changed here. The same law books lined the shelves, the same ancestral portraits hung in the foyer, the same antique clock ticked in the hallway, marking time in a home where progress was measured in generations, not hours. "I thought we could eat in tonight," my mother said, leading me toward the kitchen. "I've prepared your favorite chicken piccata. Jason might join us if he finishes at the courthouse early enough." I nodded, setting my suitcase by the stairs. "That sounds nice. Actually, Mom, there's something important I need to discuss with you and Dad." She paused, maternal intuition flickering across her face. "Is everything all right? You sound serious." "It's just a conversation I'd prefer to have with both of you together." She studied me for a moment, then nodded. "I'll call your father. Why don't you pour us some wine? The Chardonnay is already open." As she disappeared toward my father's study, I moved to the kitchen, my hands trembling slightly as I reached for the wine glasses. On the refrigerator, held by a Boston Legal Society magnet, was a newspaper clipping about Jason's recent prosecution of a high-profile case, another triumph for the Warren legal dynasty. My father's footsteps, firm and measured, approached from the hallway. "Christy," he said, his voice carrying that mixture of affection and assessment that had defined our relationship for as long as I could remember. "This is a pleasant surprise. Your mother says you have news." I turned to face him, wine glasses in hand. He looked exactly as he always did. White shirt with rolled-up sleeves, wire-rimmed glasses. Expression expectant, but guarded. I wondered if he already suspected what was coming. "Let's sit down," I suggested, moving toward the living room. "It's important." My parents exchanged glances, but followed, taking their usual positions on the sofa, while I chose the armchair across from them, a physical representation of the divide I was about to create. "Mom, Dad," I began my rehearsed speech, suddenly evaporating. "I've made a decision that I need to share with you." My father leaned forward slightly, eyes narrowing. "Go on." I took a deep breath. "I'm withdrawing from law school, effective immediately." The silence that followed was absolute, the kind of silence that has weight and texture. My mother's hand moved to her throat in that unconscious gesture she made when shocked. My father remained perfectly still, only the slight tightening of his jaw indicating he had heard me. "I know this comes as a surprise." I continued, rushing to fill the silence before they could recover and interrupt. "But law school isn't my passion, and it never has been. I've been pursuing another path alongside my studies, one that brings me genuine fulfillment and success." "What other path?" my father finally asked, his voice dangerously quiet. "Technology. Software development. I've built several security applications over the past few years. In fact, I sold my first company while still in college." My mother's expression shifted from shock to confusion. "What are you talking about, Christy? You never mentioned any of this." "Because I knew you wouldn't approve. You've had my life mapped out since before I was born. Harvard law clerkships, joining Dad's firm, or following Mom to the bench. But that's your dream for me, not mine." My father stood abruptly, moving to the fireplace where he braced one hand against the mantel, his back to us. The posture I'd seen him assume countless times when deeply troubled. "How long has this been going on?" he asked, still not looking at me. "Since college. Actually, since high school, if I'm being completely honest." He turned, then eyes flashing. "So you've been lying to us for years." "I've been trying to make you proud while also honoring what I know is true for me," I countered. "Do you know how hard it's been living this double life, pretending to be passionate about something that leaves me cold inside?" My mother's voice was barely audible. "But why technology? We've given you every opportunity to excel in a respected profession with a secure future. Because it's where my talent lies. Because when I'm solving problems with code, hours pass like minutes. Because I've built something valuable enough that companies are willing to pay millions for it. That caught their attention. My father's eyebrows rose. Millions? What are you talking about? I sold my first application for $500,000 during senior year. I've just received an offer of $25 million for my current project. My mother laughed a short, disbelieving sound. That's absurd. No one pays that kind of money for computer programs created by students. The dismissal stung more than outright anger would have. They do when those programs solve significant security problems. I can show you the offer letter, the incorporation documents, everything. This is nonsense, my father said, waving a hand as if brushing away an irritating insect. You're throwing away a prestigious career for some fantasy of Silicon Valley riches. It's not a fantasy, I insisted, pulling out my phone. I can prove it right now. I don't need to see your so-called proof, he snapped. What I see is my daughter, who we've supported through the best education money can buy, ready to flush it all down the drain on a whim. It's not a whim. I've been building this for years. My mother's eyes were filling with tears. Do you have any idea how much we've invested in you? The connections we've made? The opportunities we've secured? Judge Calloway was considering you for a clerkship that students would kill for. I appreciate everything you've done for me, I said, softening my tone. But I need to follow my own path. My father shook his head, anger giving way to something worse, disappointment. Your grandfather would be ashamed. 3 generations of legal excellence, and you want to throw it away to play entrepreneur. The reference to my grandfather, who I had adored and who had passed away during my freshman year of college, felt like a low blow. Grandpa wanted me to be happy. He told me once that the most important thing in life was to find work that didn't feel like work. Don't you dare use him to justify this, my father growled. He sacrificed everything to build our family's reputation. The conversation was spiraling out of control. I tried again, desperate to make them understand. Please just listen. This isn't a rejection of our family or our values. It's about me finding my own way to make a meaningful contribution. The company I'm building helps protect people's identities online, their most personal information. Enough. My father's fist came down on the mantel with a bang that made both my mother and me jump. I won't stand here and listen to these justifications. You want to throw away your future, fine, but don't expect us to support this delusion. My mother stood now too, her composure cracking. Christy, please reconsider. You're so close to completing your degree. Even if you don't practice law, having the credential would open doors. I don't need law school to open doors anymore, Mom. I've built my own doors. With what lines of computer code that will be obsolete in 5 years? My father's voice rose. The law is eternal, Christy. What we do matters. It shapes society, protects the vulnerable, maintains order. My work matters too, I insisted, standing to meet them at eye level. In a digital age, protecting people's data is protecting their lives. My father laughed, a harsh sound without humor. Listen to yourself. You sound like those tech bros on television spouting buzzwords to justify chasing dollars. The dismissal ignited something in me, a flash of anger that burned through my careful composure. You have no idea what I've built, because you've never bothered to ask. You've never cared about what interests me, only about molding me into a copy of yourselves. That's unfair, my mother interjected. We've only wanted what's best for you. What you think is best, I corrected. But I'm 26 years old. I get to decide what's best for me now. My father's face was turning the dangerous shade of red I'd seen only a few times in my life, usually before he eviscerated an opposing counsel in court. So you've made your decision. Just like that, you're turning your back on everything we've built. I'm not turning my back on our family, Dad. I'm just choosing a different professional path. The front door opened then, and Jason walked in, stopping abruptly as he sensed the tension in the room. Whoa, what did I miss? Your sister has decided law isn't good enough for her, my father bit out. She's dropping out to become a tech entrepreneur or some such nonsense. Jason looked at me, surprise evident on his face. Seriously? I didn't even know you were into tech. That's because no one in this family has ever asked me what I'm into, I said quietly. You've all been too busy telling me what I should want. My father paced the room now, anger radiating from him in waves. This discussion is over. Christy, I want you to go back to campus, finish your semester, and we'll talk about this again when you've had time to think rationally. I've already withdrawn, I said, the words falling like stones into the tense air. My decision is final. He stopped pacing and stared at me, his expression hardening into something I'd never seen directed at me before. Then so is mine. He pointed toward the door, hand shaking with fury. Get out and stay out. My mother gasped. Richard. No, Donna. If she's adult enough to throw away everything we've given her, she's adult enough to face the consequences. I won't have her under my roof if this is the path she chooses. Jason stepped between us. Dad, come on. This is extreme. But my father was beyond reason, years of control suddenly slipping through his fingers. Stay out of this, Jason. Your sister has made her choice. I stood frozen, the reality of what was happening washing over me in icy waves. I had prepared for anger, for disappointment, even for attempts to change my mind. But not for this. Not for complete rejection. Fine, I finally said, my voice surprisingly steady. I'll go, but I want you both to know that I love you, and when you're ready to accept my choices, I'll be waiting. I moved toward the stairs to collect my suitcase, but my father's voice stopped me. Leave it. Anything you want from your childhood room can be shipped to whatever address you provide, Jason. The finality in his tone pierced me. This wasn't a temporary tantrum. He was cutting me out completely. My mother was crying openly now. Richard, please. She's our daughter. She made her decision, Donna. His voice was implacable. I looked at my mother silently, pleading for her to defend me, to take my side just once. But decades of deferring to my father in family matters held her back. She looked away, tears streaming down her face. With as much dignity as I could muster, I walked to the door, pausing only to look back at the tableau I was leaving behind, my father rigid with anger. My mother collapsed in silent tears. My brother caught between them, his expression torn between loyalty to our parents and concern for me. Goodbye, I said softly. I hope someday you'll try to understand. The door closed behind me with a quiet click that belied the seismic shift in my life. I stood on the front steps of my childhood home, suddenly homeless, in a very real sense, cut off from my family and the identity they had crafted for me. But as I walked away, something unexpected happened. With each step, the weight I had carried for years seemed to lighten. By the time I reached the corner and hailed a taxi, I was standing straighter, breathing easier. The worst had happened, and I had survived. The path ahead was uncertain, but for the first time, it was truly mine. The driver pulled up to the luxurious Boston Harbor Hotel, where I had booked a suite using my newly accessible wealth. As he retrieved my purse, which contained my laptop, phone, and wallet, I realized how little I physically possessed in that moment. Everything else I owned was either in my apartment near campus or in my childhood bedroom, now inaccessible to me. Rough day, the driver asked, noting my tear-stained face. Life-changing, I replied, tipping him generously. The hotel suite was impersonal but beautiful, with panoramic views of Boston Harbor that seemed to symbolize possibility and escape. I sat on the edge of the king-sized bed, alone in a way I had never been before, untethered from the expectations and roles that had defined me. I ordered room service, showered, and called the airline to book a flight to Los Angeles for the following morning. Then I opened my laptop and drafted emails to finalize the acquisition with Quantum Shield. If I was going to rebuild my life on my own terms, I would need that $25 million more than ever. That night, I barely slept, replaying the confrontation with my parents, wondering if there was anything I could have said differently, any approach that might have penetrated my father's rigid worldview. Dawn found me at the window, watching the city come alive as fishing boats headed out to sea. My phone showed no missed calls from my parents, though Jason had texted, "They'll come around. Give it time. Let me know where you land." I boarded the flight to Los Angeles, feeling like a refugee carrying the few possessions I had with me and the invisible weight of my family's rejection. But as the plane lifted off, something else lifted within me, a sense of possibility I hadn't fully allowed myself to feel before. The bridges behind me were burning, yes, but the horizon ahead was limitless. The Malibu house was even more spectacular in person. Perched on a cliff overlooking the Pacific Ocean, its glass and steel structure gleamed in the California sunshine. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed views of endless blue water, and a minimalist interior awaited my personal touch. The previous owners left most of the furniture as discussed, the real estate agent explained, handing me the keys. Will you be needing recommendations for interior designers? Most of our clients in this price range prefer to customize. I shook my head, walking toward the wall of glass that showcased the ocean view. Not yet. I just need to live in it for a while, figure out what feels right. After she left, I walked through the empty rooms, my footsteps echoing. 6 bedrooms, 7 bathrooms, a chef's kitchen home, theater, infinity pool, and a 4-car garage, all for just me. It felt excessive, almost ridiculous, but also like a statement I had succeeded on my own terms without the family name or connections. That first night in my new home, I sat on the terrace with a glass of wine watching the sun sink into the Pacific. The beauty was overwhelming, but the silence was deafening. No phone calls from my mother checking in, no texts from my father about a case he thought I'd find interesting. Just me, my achievements, and the uncertain future I had chosen. The following days passed in a blur of logistics. I finalized the acquisition deal in a downtown Los Angeles law firm, irony not lost on me as I signed papers that officially made me a multimillionaire. The lawyers treated me with a deference that was both gratifying and unsettling, after years of being the promising daughter, rather than an accomplished professional in my own right. Ms. Warren, congratulations, the Quantum Shield CEO said, shaking my hand after the signing. We're excited to incorporate your technology into our security suite. Would you consider staying on as a consultant? Someone with your vision would be an asset. I smiled, experiencing a validation my family had never offered. I might be interested, but I need some time first. This transition has been more complicated than expected. Each morning I checked my phone for messages from my parents. Each morning there were none. I called Madison regularly, who updated me on the gossip at law school, where my sudden disappearance had sparked rumors ranging from a nervous breakdown to a secret pregnancy. Your dad called Professor Harrington, she told me during one call. Apparently, he wanted to know if you had seemed unstable in the weeks before you left. Harrington told him you seemed perfectly rational, just increasingly disengaged. I laughed despite myself. Of course, Dad would rather believe I had a psychiatric issue than simply a different ambition. 2 weeks into my California exile, I met my first neighbor, Taylor Jenkins, a successful novelist who lived in the equally impressive house next door. She appeared at my door with a bottle of champagne and an easy smile. Welcome to the neighborhood of beautiful views and beautiful people with complicated lives, she said, extending the bottle. I thought you might need this. Moving to a new place is always an adventure, especially when you arrive alone. Taylor was in her 40s with sun-streaked blonde hair and laugh lines that suggested a life fully lived. We sat on my terrace sharing the champagne as the afternoon sun turned the ocean to liquid gold. So what brings you to Malibu? She asked. Most people on this cliff are either escaping something or celebrating something. Sometimes both. I hesitated, then found myself telling her everything, the words pouring out in a torrent of relief at finally being able to speak the full truth about who I was and what I had done. When I finished, she nodded thoughtfully. Families have a way of writing scripts for us before we even know what story we want to tell. Breaking free of that script is one of the hardest and bravest things you can do. Does it get easier? I asked, thinking of the hollow space in my chest where my family's approval used to reside. The guilt fades, she said. The second guessing gets quieter. But the love and the hurt, those stick around. They just become part of your story rather than defining it. Taylor became my first friend in California. introducing me to local restaurants, inviting me to small gatherings at her home, and offering the kind of casual support that made my massive house feel less empty. But even with her warmth and the validation of my professional success, I felt adrift, cut off from the roots that had both constrained and sustained me. I threw myself into a new project, a platform designed to help college students launch startups while still in school, something I wished had existed for me. Working filled the hours and gave purpose to my days, but the nights remained long and quiet. Samantha flew out to visit a month after my move, touring my new home with appreciative eyes. "Not bad for someone who was worried about disappointing her parents," she said, taking in the ocean view. "How are you really doing, though, beyond the success?" I shrugged, leaning against the kitchen island. "I keep checking social media to see glimpses of their lives. Mom posted pictures from a charity gala last week. Dad received an award from the Bar Association. They look unchanged, like their daughter didn't just walk out of their lives." "They're probably protecting their privacy," Samantha suggested. "Public displays of family discord aren't the Warren style I imagine." She was right, of course. My family had always maintained a careful public image, resolving conflicts behind closed doors with rational discussion and minimal emotion. Except this time, there had been no resolution, just a door slammed on any possibility of understanding. "I've been thinking about hosting a housewarming party," I said, changing the subject. "Nothing too elaborate, just a few new friends, some colleagues from Quantum Shield. Would that be silly?" Samantha smiled. "It would be healthy. This house needs voices and laughter. It's too beautiful to be a fortress of solitude." So I planned a small gathering, hiring a local caterer and selecting wines with Taylor's help. Madison flew out from Boston, marveling at my new life and bringing news from my old one. "Jason asks about you all the time," she said as we prepared for the party. "He seems torn between loyalty to your parents and worry for you. Has he said anything about them? Whether they're softening at all?" Madison's expression told me everything before she spoke. "They don't discuss you, at least not where he can hear. It's like they've erased you for now." The party was a success by conventional standards. My home, filled with interesting people, conversations flowed along with premium champagne, and business cards were exchanged with promises of future collaboration. But as I moved among my guests, accepting compliments on my home and my success, I felt like an actress in a play about someone else's life. Later that night, after everyone had gone, and Madison was asleep in one of the many guest rooms, I stood alone on the terrace, phone in hand. I scrolled to my father's number, finger hovering over the call button. What would I say if he actually answered? That I missed them. That I was sorry for disappointing them, but not for my choices. That the success I had achieved felt hollow without their recognition. In the end, I didn't call. Instead, I sent a text to Jason. "The door is always open if they want to talk." His reply came minutes later. "I know, they're not ready yet. But I am. Send me your address. I want to see this mansion that has my little sister playing tech mogul." It wasn't reconciliation with my family, but it was a start, a small thread still connecting me to the life I had left behind. As I looked out over the moonlit Pacific, I realized that success without connection was like this view, breathtaking, but ultimately cold comfort in the silent hours before dawn. The California sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of my home office as I prepared for a video interview with Forbes. 3 weeks had passed since my confrontation with my parents, and while the personal wound remained raw, my professional life was soaring to heights I had barely imagined. "We're going live in 5 minutes, Ms. Warren," the producer said through my computer screen. "We'll focus on your journey as a young entrepreneur and the innovative security solutions your technology provides. Does that work for you?" I nodded, adjusting my navy blazer and checking my reflection one last time. The woman looking back at me projected confidence and success, no hint of the inner turmoil that still woke me in the middle of the night. "And we're live in 3, 2, 1. The interview began with the host introducing me as one of technology's rising stars, a young innovator who sold her third company for a reported $30 million before the age of 30. The questions were straightforward at first, focusing on my security platform and how it protected users' digital identities. But then the conversation shifted. Christy, your background is fascinating. You were on track for a career in law before making this dramatic pivot to technology. What inspired that change, and was it difficult to walk away from the traditional path? I hesitated, aware that my parents might see this interview. I believe in following your genuine passions, I said carefully. I have tremendous respect for the legal profession, but technology has always been where my heart and talents lie. Sometimes the hardest decisions are also the most necessary ones for authentic success. The host nodded appreciatively. Well, that decision has certainly paid off. Forbes will be featuring you in next month's 30 Under 30 issue. Congratulations on turning your passion into such remarkable success. After the interview ended, I sat quietly wondering if my diplomatic answers would reach my parents, if they would recognize the olive branch extended in my careful words. Later that afternoon, a local news station arrived at my home for a segment on young entrepreneurs transforming the tech landscape. The cameras captured the stunning ocean view from my terrace as I explained my mission to democratize cybersecurity. My newest project focuses on helping college students launch their own startups, I told the reporter. I believe innovation can come from anywhere, and young people shouldn't have to choose between education and entrepreneurship. It was a pointed message aimed at my parents, even if they never saw it. The idea that one could honor education while still forging an unconventional path. The interview aired that evening on the local news and was picked up by several national outlets. My phone buzzed with congratulatory messages from Samantha Madison and my new California contacts. But the notification that made my heart stop was a text from a number I didn't recognize. Saw you on TV. We need to talk. Coffee tomorrow. It was signed simply J. Jason. My brother had reached out. With trembling fingers, I texted back, "Name the place and time." We agreed to meet at a quiet cafe in Santa Monica Neutral Territory, far from both my Malibu mansion and the law offices where he was visiting for a conference. I arrived early, claiming a corner table and ordering a latte that I was too nervous to drink. When Jason walked in, the sight of him hit me like a physical force. He looked exactly like our father, from the wire-rimmed glasses to the precisely knotted tie, but his expression held a warmth our fathers had lacked during our last encounter. "Nice blazer," he said, sliding into the seat across from me. "Very tech CEO." I laughed, despite my nerves. "Nice tie. Very district attorney." We studied each other across the table, the silence heavy with unasked questions. "You look good," he finally said. "Success agrees with you." "Thanks. How are they?" I asked, unable to delay the real conversation any longer. Jason sighed, removing his glasses to rub the bridge of his nose, a gesture so reminiscent of our father that my throat tightened. "They're processing. Dad saw you on the business news last week. He didn't say anything, but he watched the whole segment. Mom cried afterward. Because she's disappointed in me." "Because she misses you," Jason corrected. "And because she saw how happy you looked talking about your work, happier than she'd ever seen you discussing law." Hope flickered within me. "So they're coming around." Jason's expression sobered. "I wouldn't go that far. Dad's pride is severely wounded. You didn't just choose a different path. You succeeded spectacularly on it, which challenges everything he believed about how success should be achieved." "I never meant to hurt them," I said quietly. "I just couldn't live their dream anymore." "I know that. I think even they know it deep down." He leaned forward. "But Christy, you have to understand something about Mom and Dad. Their identities are completely wrapped up in their careers and the legacy they're building. Your rejection of law feels personal to them, like a rejection of everything they value." "It wasn't about them at all," I insisted. "It was about me finding my own way." "Our parents aren't great at separating those things," Jason said with a sad smile. "Remember how Dad reacted when I chose criminal law instead of corporate? That was a fraction of what you did, and he didn't speak to me for 2 weeks." I remembered. Our father had seen Jason's choice as a rebuke of his own career, rather than a different expression of the same values. "So what now?" I asked. "Do I just wait until they decide I'm worthy of being their daughter again?" Jason reached across the table and took my hand, a gesture of solidarity we had rarely shared as competitive siblings. They're hurting, but they're also proud, even if they can't admit it yet. Dad cut out the article about your security platform from the Wall Street Journal. I found it in his desk drawer. My eyes filled with tears. Really? He nodded. Give them time, and maybe make the first move. They're from a generation that values tradition and respect. Your success challenges their worldview, but it also gives you a platform they understand achievement. We talked for hours, Jason filling me in on family news and office gossip, carefully avoiding deeper analysis of our parents' feelings. As we parted with a hug outside the cafe, he whispered, "Don't give up on them, Christy. They haven't given up on you even if it seems that way." Driving back to Malibu, I felt a shift within me. The conversation with Jason had reminded me that while I had changed, I hadn't stopped being a Warren. The determination, the drive for excellence, the unwillingness to settle all traits my parents had instilled in me were the same qualities that had made me successful in technology. Perhaps that was the bridge I needed to build, not between law and technology, but between their values and my application of them. The next morning, inspiration struck. I called Samantha and outlined my idea for a charity foundation that would provide scholarships and mentorship to underprivileged students interested in both law and technology, a way to honor my family's legacy while creating space for innovation. The Warren Innovation Fund, Samantha mused, has a nice ring to it, and a powerful message for your parents. I spent the next week developing the concept, working with lawyers, much to my private amusement, to establish the foundation. When the paperwork was complete, I scheduled a press conference to announce a $5 million initial donation to launch the fund. The event drew significant media attention, with technology publications and legal journals alike covering the initiative. Standing at the podium, cameras flashing, I spoke from the heart. Education opened doors for me as it has for generations of my family. I said, thinking of my father and grandfather. This fund creates pathways for students who see the intersection of law and technology as the frontier of modern justice. It honors tradition while embracing innovation. The speech was broadcast on several news channels, and my social media accounts exploded with congratulatory messages. But the only response I truly cared about didn't come. Until the next morning, when my phone displayed a text from my mother's number, the first direct communication since that fateful day in Boston. "Your grandfather would have been proud of what you're doing, Mom." 2 simple sentences that opened the door to possibility. I read them a dozen times, fingers hovering over the keyboard as I composed and deleted responses. Finally, I wrote back, "Thank you. That means everything to me. I miss you." Her reply came hours later. "I miss you too." No mention of my father, no invitation to call or visit, but a crack in the wall nonetheless. That evening, I took a bold step, sending formal invitations to my parents for my upcoming keynote address at a major technology conference in New York. The event would feature my announcement of a new educational platform designed to help law students understand the technological challenges facing the justice system. Another bridge between their world and mine, another invitation to understand the path I had chosen. The days before the conference passed in a blur of preparation and nervous anticipation. I had no idea if they would come, if they were ready to take this step toward reconciliation. Jason had been non-committal when I asked, saying only, "I've encouraged them to attend, but Dad is still wrestling with his pride." On the morning of the conference, I stood backstage, peering through the curtain at the filling auditorium. Madison and Samantha were in the front row, offering moral support, but the 2 seats I had reserved in the center remained empty as the start time approached. 2 minutes, Ms. Warren," the stage manager said, handing me a microphone. I nodded, taking deep breaths to calm my racing heart. This speech mattered professionally, but personally it represented so much more, a public declaration of who I was and the values I still shared with my family, whether they were present to hear it or not. As I was introduced and walked onto the stage to applause, I scanned the audience one more time, my prepared smile firmly in place, despite the disappointment settling in my chest. And then I saw them slipping into their seats at the last moment. My father's silver hair, unmistakable even from a distance, my mother's elegant posture exactly as I remembered. They had come. The spotlight felt suddenly warmer, the microphone heavier in my hand as I began my speech, knowing my parents were listening to every word. I had rehearsed for days, but now I found myself speaking from the heart rather than from memory. Innovation doesn't mean abandoning our foundations, I said, looking directly at where my parents sat. It means building upon them, recognizing that the values of integrity, justice, and service can take many forms in a changing world. Throughout my presentation, I wove together themes of tradition and progress, explaining how my security platform protected the very principles of privacy and personal dignity that the law was designed to uphold. As I spoke, I saw my mother lean toward my father, whispering something that made him nod slightly. When the speech ended and the applause faded, I made my way through the crowd of well-wishers, heart pounding, as I approached the section where my parents had been sitting. For a terrible moment, I thought they might have left immediately after my speech, avoiding a direct confrontation. But then I saw them standing awkwardly at the edge of the crowd, my father's expression unreadable, my mother's eyes bright with what might have been tears or pride, or both. "Mom, Dad," I said, stopping a few feet away, suddenly unsure of the protocol for greeting parents who had disowned you. "Thank you for coming." My mother moved first, closing the distance between us to wrap me in a tight embrace that smelled of the same Chanel perfume she had worn my entire life. "Your speech was wonderful, Christy." Over her shoulder, I looked at my father, who stood with hands clasped behind his back, his posture rigid, but his eyes softer than I remembered. "The Warren Innovation Fund is an interesting concept," he said, his voice formal but without the anger that had defined our last interaction. "Your grandfather was always interested in how technology could streamline legal processes." It wasn't an apology or even a direct acknowledgement of my success, but from my father it was a significant olive branch. "Maybe we could discuss it over dinner," I suggested tentatively. "I'm staying at the Pierre tonight." My parents exchanged glances, having one of those silent conversations long married couples perfect. My mother nodded almost imperceptibly, and my father cleared his throat. "That would be acceptable," he said, and I had to suppress a smile at his courtroom formality. "We have a reservation at Le Bernardin at 8. You're welcome to join us." Dinner was a careful dance of neutral topics, with my parents asking polite questions about my work and California home. We avoided any mention of the confrontation that had separated us or the pain of the past weeks. It was superficial but peaceful, a tentative first step toward whatever our relationship might become. As we parted outside the restaurant, my mother hugged me again, whispering, "He's trying in his way. This is difficult for him." I nodded, understanding that my father's pride and firmly held beliefs about success wouldn't change overnight. "I know. Tell him I appreciate the effort." The next morning, I flew back to California with a mixture of hope and lingering sadness. The wall between us had cracked but not fallen. We had shared a meal but not truly reconnected. It was progress, but the road ahead remained uncertain. 2 days later, I made another bold decision. I texted both my parents. "I'm hosting a small dinner at my home in Malibu next weekend. I'd be honored if you would come. The guest room is prepared for you." My mother replied almost immediately, "We'll check our schedules," which I knew was parent code for, "We need to discuss this." To my surprise, they accepted. That Friday afternoon, I paced nervously through my home, checking and rechecking every detail. The guest room was prepared with fresh flowers and the books my mother enjoyed. The refrigerator was stocked with my father's favorite scotch. I had even hired a chef to prepare my grandmother's recipe for beef bourguignon, a family tradition for important occasions. When their rental car pulled into my driveway, I waited on the front steps, watching as they emerged and took in the grand scale of my home for the first time. My father's eyebrows rose slightly, a reluctant acknowledgement of my success. "Welcome to California," I said, leading them inside to the wall of windows showcasing the Pacific view. "I hope the flight was comfortable." My mother gasped at the vista of endless blue. "Oh, Christy, it's magnificent." "Not bad for playing with computers," my father murmured, but there was a hint of humor in his tone that gave me hope. That evening, as we sat at my dining table overlooking the ocean sunset, the conversation gradually moved beyond pleasantries to more meaningful territory. "I've been thinking about what you said in your speech," my father said, swirling his scotch. "About building on foundations rather than abandoning them." I nodded, heart quickening. "I meant every word." "Your foundation is stronger than I gave you credit for." He looked directly at me, a rare vulnerability in his expression. "I was wrong to suggest you were throwing away your education. You've applied it differently than I expected, that's all." It wasn't quite an apology, but from my father it was monumental. I swallowed the lump in my throat. "Thank you for saying that." My mother reached across the table to take my hand. "We were afraid, Christy. Afraid you were making a terrible mistake that would lead to regret and hardship. We couldn't see that you had already built something solid." "I was afraid too," I admitted. "Afraid of disappointing you, of losing your love. That's why I kept my work secret for so long." My father sighed heavily. "I may have been overly rigid in my reaction. When you said you were dropping out, all I could see was failure, not the success you had already achieved." "I should have found a better way to tell you," I said. "Springing it on you like that after years of secrecy wasn't fair either." We were all silent for a moment, the sound of waves crashing below the only interruption to this delicate new understanding. "I have something for you," I said, finally rising to retrieve a large envelope from my office. I placed it on the table between us, watching as my father opened it with careful fingers. Inside was the legal documentation establishing a scholarship in my family's name at my father's law school alma mater, specifically for students interested in the intersection of technology and law. "The Warren Legacy Scholarship," he read aloud, voice uncharacteristically unsteady. "For future innovators in legal technology." "I wanted to honor where I came from," I said quietly. "Because even though I've chosen a different path, the values you instilled in me, the drive for excellence, the commitment to making a difference, those are still at the core of everything I do." My mother wiped away tears, and even my father seemed moved, carefully replacing the papers in the envelope with the precision that had defined his legal career. "It's a worthy initiative," he said formally, but the slight tremor in his hand told me more than his words. Later that night, after my parents had retired to the guest room, I stood on my terrace looking out at the moonlight dancing on the water. The dinner hadn't magically healed all wounds or erased the harsh words exchanged in Boston. My father was still my father, proud and sometimes rigid in his thinking. My mother was still caught between her husband's strong opinions and her love for her daughter. But we had begun the journey toward a new kind of relationship, one based on mutual respect rather than expectation and obedience. It would take time, many more conversations, probably some setbacks and misunderstandings. The hurt couldn't be erased in a single weekend. Yet, as I watched the endless rhythm of the waves below, I felt a peace I hadn't experienced since before that fateful confrontation. I had stood my ground, followed my passion, and achieved success on my terms. And now, slowly, carefully, I was building a bridge back to my family without sacrificing who I had become. The next morning, as I walked my parents to their car for their return flight, my father paused, looking back at my home with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Your grandfather used to say that the measure of a person isn't the path they choose, but how they walk it," he said. "I think he would agree you've walked yours with integrity." Coming from my father, it was the highest compliment he could offer. I blinked back tears as I hugged him goodbye, feeling his arms tentatively return the embrace. "We'll call when we land," my mother promised, kissing my cheek. As I watched their car disappear down the winding coastal road, I knew our relationship would never return to what it had been before. The parent-child dynamic of authority and obedience was gone forever. But in its place, something new and potentially stronger was taking root, a relationship between equals who shared blood and history but had learned to respect different dreams. 2 years later, I stood beside my parents at the ribbon-cutting ceremony for the Warren Center for Legal Innovation, a space where law students and tech entrepreneurs could collaborate on projects addressing justice in the digital age. My father, now semi-retired, had agreed to serve on the advisory board, bringing his decades of legal wisdom to a new generation of innovators. As cameras flashed, capturing the three of us together, my father leaned close and whispered, "I was wrong that day, Christy, and I'm sorry it took me so long to say it." I squeezed his hand, no words necessary between us anymore. We had found our way back to each other, not by compromising who we were, but by expanding our understanding of success, family, and love. The journey from that devastating get out and stay out to this moment of mutual respect had been painful, messy, and worthwhile, teaching me that sometimes you have to risk losing everything to discover who you truly are, and that when the foundations are strong enough, what matters most finds its way back to you. Have you ever had to choose between following your passion and meeting others' expectations? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. And if this resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to hear more real-life stories about finding your own path. Remember, sometimes the hardest choices lead to the greatest growth. Thank you for joining me on this journey, and I wish you the courage to follow your own heart, even when the path isn't clear.